Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, where we bring awareness of sustainable health in the business hustle space. The Natural Health Podcast is perfect for the high-performing, business-minded individuals who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve success and optimal health. It's Friday, which means it's time for friends sharing facts about health, business, and overall success. In today's episode, we talk to Dr. Rahima Hirji. Dr. Rahima is a naturopathic doctor in Toronto, Canada, with almost 20 years experience. She is absolutely passionate about women's health, hormones, and gut health. She's also the co-owner of Sage Naturopathic Clinic and the Tummy Clinic. A few things that Dr. Rahima loves are cooking, exercising, and reading. Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're most welcome. So cooking, what type of cooking do you love to do?
Oh, I love to cook all kinds of things. I do cook a fair amount of Indian food because that's my heritage, my culture. But I love to cook Italian food. I love to bake. I'm making soups all the time. Anything and everything. I love it.
I love that. And in the Indian food that I love is that they use the herbs, the spices to make the flavor. Oh my God. And then for hours it's there on the stove and just smell in the house is just brilliant.
Yeah, the aroma and all of it's so, the flavors are so much deeper than a lot of other cultures, I find. Yeah,
it's absolutely brilliant. So look, today on the Natural Health Podcast, we're going to be talking about vitamin D. But before we get into it, I wanted to know a little bit about you and get the audience to know who you are and who we're speaking to. So what have been the key turning points in your journey to where you are now as a naturopathic doctor?
So when I was younger, I always wanted to become a medical doctor. That was always what I wanted to do. You know, starting from grade school, primary school, I worked very, very hard, always got great grades, did everything I could to kind of forge that path. And then when I started university, my grandmother became very, very ill, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And then a good part of my second year was spent kind of watching her manage that diagnosis. And, you know, this was a time when integrated medicine or just wasn't a thing, right? You just did what the doctor told you. And so she went through the chemo and the radiation. And after only a few sessions, it became clear that it wasn't helping her. In fact, she was deteriorating. Shortly thereafter, she passed away. And I was kind of at a loss because this was all I ever wanted to do. And then when I saw her go through that, I thought, well, that's not the kind of system I want to be a part of. So then, you know, after my second year, I took some time to look at other professions. And then somebody introduced me to naturopathic medicine. And I thought, well, you know, this is great because I get to help people, but I get to do it in a so much more holistic way, you know, using food as medicine, you know, helping people with their lifestyle. So that was really the turning point for me. And then after that, you know, I became a naturopathic medicine. I worked at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine for several years. And then I started, you know, working on my own, opening up my own clinic. And I naturally, you know, veered towards women's health, mostly because obviously I'm a woman. Maybe it's not so obvious, but I'm a woman. And, you know, I was going through several things at the time. I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And so everything that was going on in my own life drove me to dig deeper and deeper into women's health. And then slowly that interest also evolved into gastrointestinal health. And so predominantly, that's now what I treat is hormone health and gastrointestinal health.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, look, it's always so sad when someone close to us gets diagnosed with some type of disease or, you know, something that could be potentially fatal. And it just triggers something inside of us, sometimes to change. And it's interesting that you were going down the route of becoming a medical doctor, and then there was a little bit of a trigger, a bit of a change that moved you to naturopathy.
Yeah, and I'm so happy about it because I just, you know, having done what I've done for the last almost 20 years, I couldn't have envisioned picking another career or being like a family doctor or a specialist. I just love the way that I'm able to practice medicine and support my patients.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. And then, you know, like you said, you're a woman and you yourself have had endometriosis, so you're able to not only assist those women with it, but also understand. And I think that's where the compassion, and I think that's where the connection arises.
Absolutely. I actually went through quite a bit with my diagnosis. I struggled with infertility. I had to go through some, assisted reproductive technologies. So I'd gone through all that, and it was interesting because those ended up being the types of patients that I attracted, right? The women that were having trouble getting pregnant, the women that were doing IUIs and IVFs. It was just interesting how it all evolved, and that became, my passion and my life's work, really.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And now you have your own clinic, is that right? You're a co-owner of a clinic in Canada.
Yeah, so I co-own two clinics, actually. I own a clinic in Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario, which is a province in Canada. And then I also am co-owner of something called the Tummy Clinic, which is a clinic that focuses on irritable bowel syndrome. And that's actually quite a unique clinic in that there's 3 naturopathic doctors who have partnered with 2 gastroenterologists and have just come up with a protocol that is backed with evidence, right, from the gastroenterologist point of view, but very integrated and holistic from the naturopathic point of view. So it's really brought together the best of both worlds, and we were able to launch virtually when the pandemic began. So that's been really exciting and fun to see how we can help patients from this integrated model.
Wow, that's absolutely brilliant. And you just launched that last year and it's virtually available. So is that only available for individuals in Canada, or is that available worldwide?
Yeah, unfortunately, all of my services are only available to people in Ontario. They can be virtual for sure, but you have to be in Ontario, unfortunately, with the regulations here.
Such a great idea. I love that, because gastroenterology and naturopathy mixed together, that's absolutely brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
So look, I guess, success throughout your life would have changed. I mean, you said you've been in naturopathic medicine for 20 years. I guess it would have been different success at the start to what it is now. So what does the Rahima success look like right now?
So right now it's very different than it was in the beginning, right? In the beginning, when you start practice, you just really want to build your practice. You want to pay off your student loan. You want to have a full roster. And I was fortunate enough to develop that and to have that fairly early on, because I was in a small community, and word travels fast in a small community. But then, what ended up happening is I became so busy that I started to get really burnt out. And so I had 2 little kids, and my husband was working a lot, and I was working a lot, and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I could tell that my patients were feeling that too. Like I wasn't bringing the same passion to the table. So I ended up taking a bit of time off. I was cut back my practice quite significantly, and then went back kind of a year and a half ago. And it's, to me now, success is about, doing everything on my own terms, right? So having the freedom to choose where I spend my time, whether that be work or volunteering or with family. And it's really the freedom to make choices based on my own terms, right? So my own ethics, my own beliefs, my own desires, and to just be very comfortable in my own skin with those decisions. So definitely my interpretation of a successful life has changed quite significantly over the years.
Yeah, I mean, look, running a few clinics, having a family, being a naturopathic doctor, being part of the community, like all of that in itself is taxing, on yourself, because, I mean, you want to give your patients the best, you want to give your family the best, you want to give the community the best, and it's just an ongoing circle, isn't it?
Yeah. And I especially found it was really important to me because I really wanted to help people. There's always a business aspect to any practice. But to me, it wasn't so much about that. I wasn't driven necessarily by the numbers or the books, right? I truly just wanted to help people. And what I loved about what I got to do is I really got to know my patients. I got to know their families. I got to know their children and their husbands and their aunts. And, that's what I loved about it. I was able to touch people's lives, but then it became so much bigger than just the individual sitting in front of me. So that's really what I wanted to get out of it. So it was important to me that I always stay true to that.
Yeah. And I guess by knowing all that, you were able to assist your patients in a holistic way. And it's not just, I have diabetes and that's it. It's kind of like you get to know them as a whole person.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to know what their struggles are going to be. So you're much better able to guide them and provide protocols that you know they will be able to follow.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Now that we know a little bit about you, let's get into today's topic. I'm so excited. Vitamin D here in Australia. We're in autumn, about to go into winter. You guys just came out of winter or coming into summer. So I guess vitamin D is a hot topic. I mean, it's often called a sunshine vitamin. It's a very important nutrient for overall health. But in today's episode, we will talk about the vitamin or hormone, as you want to call it, and its importance especially in women's health. So to start off, can you actually explain what vitamin D or hormone D is in a little detail?
Yeah, for sure. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. It's also referred to as calciferol. It's found in some foods naturally, and it's fortified in other foods, or it can be taken as a supplement. But the biggest source of vitamin D is the one that you make. So your body will naturally produce vitamin D when your skin is exposed to sunlight or to ultraviolet rays. But an interesting fact that you've been alluding to is that vitamin D is not actually technically a vitamin, because your body can make it, and it behaves more like a hormone in your body than like a vitamin.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, where a lot of people are like, what, is vitamin D a hormone? I didn't know that. So then it's kind of like, it makes sense how important it is in women's health, because women are filled with hormones.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, just one more, right? Add it to the list.
Just one more added to the list. And I mean, vitamin D it's so intriguing. And I mean, it's made the news lately due to the pandemic and so forth. But how is vitamin D actually absorbed in our body, and what is its function? Because I know we get it from, like you said, we get it from the sun, and we can also get it from the food. But how can it be absorbed in both ways, I guess, in a way? And then what are the functions in it? Because lately it's got a lot of the news about its immune system, its benefits and so forth. So if you can just expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, for sure. So, as I mentioned, you can get some vitamin D in foods like salmon and tuna, mackerel, egg yolks, but typically people don't ingest a lot of these foods. So now many foods are fortified with vitamin D. And when you ingest these foods, your body absorbs the vitamin D through your intestines. When it comes from sun exposure, your body converts cholesterol that's already in your body to vitamin D after being exposed to ultraviolet B light. So this is really important to note, especially for darker skinned people, because as the pigment in their skin reduces absorption of UV light, they make less vitamin D. So vitamin D is important for everybody, but it's especially important for people that have darker skin or more pigment in their skin. And regardless of the source of vitamin D, so whether you're ingesting it or whether you're getting it and making it from the sun, it needs to go to your liver and then to your kidneys to become activated. And after it becomes activated, it can be used in your body for its various functions. Now, when it comes to its role in the body, after it's absorbed by the intestines, if you don't have enough vitamin D, for instance, and you're not making enough of it, people will develop things like rickets. So that's very common in children, or adults will develop osteomalacia. Now, these diseases are quite rare now, right? Because we are fortifying all the food and we are more aware of the role of vitamin D. But it's still very important to make sure that you have enough vitamin D to maintain your bone health. There are vitamin D receptors present throughout the body, though, not just in the intestines. So over the years, it's become clear that vitamin D is not just important for your bone health, and that a deficiency can contribute to things like cancer, depression, hormonal imbalances, immune system disturbances, heart disease, autoimmune disease, and truly the list can go on and on, right? So most of us are getting enough vitamin D so that our children aren't getting rickets and we're not getting osteomalacia. but we're not all getting enough vitamin D to avoid some of these other things that might be a problem for some of us.
Yeah, and the interesting point that you made there that the audience may not be aware of is, yes, we absorb the vitamin D through our skin, but you've mentioned in there that we need our kidneys and our liver to process it. So now a lot of individuals may have kidney or liver issues, so therefore that may affect their vitamin D levels. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in those patients, you definitely want to be monitoring vitamin D levels. If you've got any kind of liver issue or kidney disease, you definitely want to be monitoring your vitamin D levels even more closely.
Yeah, and then also the thing that you brought up is cholesterol. And this is what I find very interesting. There's a lot of individuals who have high cholesterol and they take things to lower their cholesterol. So therefore, this may lower their vitamin D levels.
Yeah, although, I mean, I can't say I'm so aware of that connection, but it makes sense, right? It makes sense that you need a certain amount of cholesterol to make vitamin D. And if you really, really reduce the cholesterol in your body, it's just not going to be available to make the vitamin D.
Yeah. So it's not just us going outside in the sun and that's it. We get our vitamin D. There's so much more that happens in our body for us to actually absorb it and make use of it. So then, we don't get that autoimmune disease. We don't get heart disease, or we reduce our risks of it, of course. So interesting. This is why I absolutely love vitamin D. But what are some common symptoms, especially in women, when they're vitamin D deficient? So let's say, they get their yearly blood test done and they find out they're vitamin D deficient in women. What would they kind of experience?
So it's not always so clear when you have a vitamin D deficiency. And that's why it's partly nearly impossible to diagnose a deficiency without a blood test. And that's why I'm always recommending my patients to get their vitamin D levels tested. It's such a simple test and it's so helpful. And because vitamin D has so many different effects in the body, a deficiency can lead to so many different things. So you might find, especially in the winter here in Canada, if your mood is going down, that's probably because you're not getting exposure to the sun and because you're not making enough vitamin D. So you've got that deficiency, right? So things like fatigue, muscle weakness, PMS, all of these things can be related to vitamin D, but it's not always so clear cut. And so that's why it's important, if you're just generally not feeling well, whatever it might be, it's worth just throwing in that vitamin D test to rule it out as a deficiency.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm like you, I'm the same. I love getting those blood tests and seeing, what is actually happening inside of the body. And it's interesting because I always in my head, I'm like, yep, let's check the vitamin D. And then we look at it and we're like, bam, spot on. Look how low that vitamin D is. And even in summer, we just came out of summer and I've got a number of individuals who absolutely low in vitamin D because we've become to be scared of the sun and we're just hiding from it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting what you said, because a lot of my patients will want to stop their vitamin D in the summer. And I'll say, no, please keep taking it. You don't have to take as high a dose. And it was a funny story, actually, with my own experience. I'm a runner in the summer. I won't run in the winter, but I'm a runner in the summer. And I had been running all summer. I had this beautiful tan. Now I am naturally a bit of a darker skin. My heritage is Indian. And I don't wear sunscreen. I know I should sometimes, but I don't. And I'd been running all summer and I thought, oh, my vitamin D levels must be fantastic. And then come September, October, I tested my vitamin D and I was low. And that was after a summer of a lot of sun exposure, running 3-4 hours a week in the sun. And so that was really eye-opening to me, because I thought with all that sun exposure, there's no way I would be low in vitamin D, and yet I still was. So I think we really, really underestimate, especially here in Canada, because we're so far north, how important it is to make sure that our levels are okay.
Yeah. And just because, and that's a perfect example, just because you're in the sun doesn't mean you're making vitamin D.
Yeah, exactly. And nowadays we're hardly outside, right? So I feel like most people are indoors all the time. And when they are outside, they're using sunscreen that's blocking all of that UV light necessary to make the vitamin D. So it's becoming more and more of an issue for sure.
100%. So it's actually my understanding that humans get about I think 80% of the vitamin D from ultraviolet B raised via the skin, right? And 20% from their diet. So you've spoken about some foods that are some high in vitamin D, but you said that we rely mostly on the sun. So what would you say, just what we spoke about, you're talking about people staying inside, but what is that, do you think that's the main reason why we may be vitamin D deficient, that we're mainly indoors, or are there any other reasons?
I think that's one of the predominant reasons for sure. I mean, the way we live is very different now, right? We spend a lot more time indoors than we ever have in the past. So, like we said, or like I said, that exposure is just not there anymore. But on top of that, as a society, we tend to be getting a little bit more obese, putting on a little bit more fat. And what happens is vitamin D gets stored in that fat, and then it won't circulate and do its job in other parts of the body, right? So that's another factor. So if you're a little bit overweight, you're more likely to have that vitamin D deficiency. And also as we get older, so the older we get, the less vitamin D that we make, and also the less we absorb in our intestines. So it's really important to consider these other factors that might be affecting your vitamin D level as well.
Yeah, there's so many factors. So I guess if we imagine someone, I guess in their 50s, 60s, who's obese and doesn't get out much, there's a huge vitamin D factor right there due to the intestines, due to the exposure, the diet, so many things to take in consideration.
Yeah, 100%.
And I just imagine people, who go into the office, you wake up, you're inside, you jump in the car, you're inside, you think you may get some through the sun, through the window. You're in the car, and then you go into the office, lunch, you have it at the desk, and then you go back home. So really, you're not really outside. And then you're like, on the weekends, I might go for a walk, but that doesn't make up for it.
No, not at all. I mean, especially here in Canada, and in the darkest days of winter, it's dark when you wake up. You get a little bit of sun on your way to work, but then by the time you leave work, it's dark again. Like 4:30, it's dark. So it can be a real big problem, especially depending on the season.
Yeah. And another thing also, which is interesting that you touched upon, is the skin color of individuals. So I can just imagine how individuals who live near the equator and then they move outside into really northern countries, how much that would affect them too. And I guess, they might feel like they're getting depressed because they moved countries and things like that. Yes, it may be because they're missing people and so forth, but it's also got to do with the vitamin D, that they're not absorbing as much because their skin color.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's so interesting that way, right? Because many people, we just don't attribute it to the vitamin D deficiency. We're like, oh, it's just PMS, or I'm just depressed, or, it's just the winter. But no, maybe it's your vitamin D, right? Like, get it checked out.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So today we're going to be talking about, we've spoken a bit about vitamin D, but in particular to women's health. I wanted to know a little bit about what do you think is the importance of this vitamin specific to women's health? I know it's a broad question, but if you can just give us a little bit more information about why vitamin D is actually so important for women.
Okay, well, so let's start with the bone health, right? So women have lighter and thinner bones, which puts them at almost 4 times the risk of developing osteoporosis. And then on top of that, during menopause, estrogen and progesterone decrease. And these hormones play a big role in bone health. So when estrogen and progesterone decrease, they can lead to even more bone loss. And then a woman's risk goes up even higher. So an estimated 1 in 2 women over the age of 50 will break a bone due to osteoporosis, right? So this can be attributed, your bone health can be attributed to vitamin D, right? It's a big factor in determining your bone health. Certainly there's other things like exercise and whether or not you're big boned or a very small frame. But this is something you can control. That's the vitamin D. Right.
Yeah, and we know so many people, like you said, over the age of 50 who have fallen and broken a hip, broken a bone. I know my grandmother. I know on the weekend I was away, and the lady across the road, she fell and broke her knee. And there's so many things that so many women have falls and they break. And it's interesting that this is directly related to vitamin D.
Absolutely. Like I said, there are other factors for sure, but vitamin D is one of the big ones that you can control, just by taking a supplement or making sure you're getting enough sun exposure. And then the other one, of course, is heart disease. So vitamin D deficiency has been associated with a higher incidence of heart disease. And as we know, heart disease is quite common in women. So again, women need to be vigilant and ensure that their levels of their levels of vitamin D are adequate so that they can reduce their risk of heart disease.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's linked to heart disease too. There's so many things, bone health, heart disease. The other day I read a study about vitamin D and how it was called the topic was a sexy hormone, because vitamin D was linked to women's libido and women's mood. It was so interesting, and they were saying in there, the research said that the lower the vitamin D in these women were, the lower their libido was, and therefore also their mood. So interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I know today we're talking predominantly about women, but a lot of this also translates into men as well, right? So vitamin D is equally important for men for a lot of the same reasons. It's just such a underappreciated little vitamin/hormone.
Yeah, so glad that you mentioned that, because it's so important throughout, all of our years, or when we're younger to middle age to older, and also with male health and so forth. It's every human has vitamin D, and every human needs vitamin D.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talking about making little humans. So when a woman is pregnant, I know that a lot of natural medicine practitioners love to check the vitamin D levels, including all other levels. But vitamin D is a key one that we check to make sure it's an adequate level starting off. And there's a number of reasons for this. But I wanted to know, what are your thoughts on the vitamin D levels, especially in pregnant women?
So do they actually test vitamin D in pregnant women in Australia?
I do.
You do? Okay. All right. Yeah, I was going to say, that's fantastic if everybody does it.
Yeah. Actually, what's happened in Australia in the last year or two is the general practitioners, they run a few tests, but vitamin D has actually been excluded from the tests in the last year or two. And it's just in special instances they test vitamin D. Whereas before that, vitamin D was tested all the time on regular annual or biannual tests, but it actually got excluded. And one of the reasons, I actually got one of my patients to ask their doctor, and they said it's because most everyone is vitamin D deficient in Australia, so there's no need to test.
Right. So that's the same thing in Canada. Basically, it used to be that you could get your vitamin D levels tested, and then they stopped testing it because they said, well, you're most likely deficient, so we don't need to test it, just take a supplement. And so we still run it. It costs our patients about $30-40. But I think it's the best money they're going to spend, because, whether you're a little bit deficient or a lot deficient will determine how you treat the deficiency, right? So it's unfortunate that they can't get it covered or get it through their primary care doctor as easily, but
yeah, I mean, they do request, and most of the time they do it, if there's signs and symptoms of vitamin D deficiency and so forth. But it's so interesting that Canada does the same. So, us Australia, we're following you guys.
Yeah. Or I guess, I shouldn't say Canada, but here in Ontario, we've got several provinces and territories, but in Ontario, certainly those are the same rules. Yeah.
It's so interesting, because most of us are deficient, especially in Australia too. So in pregnancy, it's key to test it, in my belief.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you look at the research, it shows that supplementing pregnant women with vitamin D alone probably reduces the risk of things like preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and low birth weight babies. And it also reduces the risk of severe postpartum hemorrhage. And like, these are serious issues that the risks can be significantly reduced by just a little bit of vitamin D, right? And there is also research that shows that women that supplement vitamin D during pregnancy have a positive impact on the child's teeth after birth. So this was some Danish researchers did a study where 300 women were given high doses of vitamin D once they reached 24 weeks of pregnancy. and then 300 others were given placebo. And the researchers found that children whose mothers had taken the extra doses of vitamin D were 50% less likely than the others to have issues such as discoloration and enamel breakdown. And then similar studies have found that vitamin D intake during pregnancy can also reduce asthma in the offspring. So that's really, really incredible that, what your vitamin D status as a pregnant woman can have such a significant impact on the child that you're bearing, right? So yeah, it's a huge role in pregnancy for sure.
Yeah, and 50% reduction, that is huge.
Yeah.
Might not sound a lot, but in a study, it's enormous, it's huge.
Yeah.
And if you can reduce that, if you can reduce the risk of your child having that by 50% by taking a vitamin D supplement, that is amazing. That is, I love these studies that come out like that because it just makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to be able to present that to people too and say, here, take it because here's the evidence. Take the vitamin D.
Yeah. I've also read some study in regards to vitamin D and brain health of the baby and autism and ADHD and links like that, which are also just mind blowing.
Yeah. There's research being done, I think, with vitamin D in almost every part of health and wellness, right? Whether it's mood, cancer, autoimmune, all of those things that we talked about at the beginning. It just plays a role in so many different parts of your health and wellness.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it just makes me think it's because we're meant to be out there. We're meant to be out there in nature a certain time of our day. We're meant to be out there, in seeing the sun, being out there, the trees, the grass. We're meant to be doing these things. Yes, the computers are amazing. And, we're able to do this interview because of this amazing computer and technology. But at the same time, there needs to be a balance.
Absolutely. We're not meant to sit inside at our desks for 10 hours a day, right? We're just not meant to do that.
Yeah, we weren't born sitting down, Our body is not made to sit like that,
Absolutely.
So interesting. So now that we know a little bit about that, are we able to go into the role vitamin D has specifically on female hormones? Because, we did say vitamin D is a hormone and, us females, we have so many hormones happening inside of our body. So what would be the key roles it plays with the female hormones?
Yeah, so we probably don't have enough time to go into all of them, but I'll certainly highlight a few that I think are really important. So one of the biggest areas that I think vitamin D plays a huge role in female hormones is in PMS, right? So when we look at vitamin D in PMS, we see that women that have PMS often have low vitamin D levels. But the problem is that vitamin D is hard to study because the reason why vitamin D levels are low can be multifactorial. So for example, low vitamin D levels are often correlated with reduced exercise outdoors. So the ill effects you see in people with low vitamin D might also be due to the fact that the people with lower vitamin D spend less time outdoors exercising. So is it the exercise or is it the low vitamin D, right? So in many cases like this, like diabetes, for instance, giving vitamin D without exercise outdoors doesn't help. However, when you give vitamin D to women with PMS, their PMS symptoms actually get better independent of exercise levels outdoors. So if you give vitamin D, the PMS gets better regardless of exercise status. What's more, the lower your vitamin D level, the worse your PMS. So some studies even look at women that aren't deficient in vitamin D, and giving those women vitamin D also improves vitamin D. So it's not always clear why vitamin D helps, but it most definitely does work and help women in PMS. So when I have a PMS patient, the first thing I'm doing is checking their vitamin D level, right?
Yes.
And then the other important aspect of vitamin D is that it can be very, very important for women trying to conceive. So it's been shown to play an essential role in all parts of pregnancy, from increasing the chance of conception and improving implantation rates in women undergoing in vitro fertilization, to pregnancy outcomes, and also a reduction in pregnancy-related complications, right? And then now kind of moving on to the life cycle of a woman, right? Going on to menopause. Vitamin D plays a role here too. So there was a study done that found a positive correlation between vitamin D and estradiol. So in other words, women with lower levels of vitamin D tended also to have lower levels of estradiol. And women with higher levels of vitamin D tended to have higher levels of estradiol. Makes sense, right? They're both hormones. Vitamin D and estradiol have synergistic role in metabolic syndrome, meaning that low levels of these will increase the likelihood of a woman developing metabolic syndrome. And that's a syndrome that encompasses a few different things like high lipids, high blood pressure, insulin resistance. And so this is something that as women get older, their risk increases. So you really want to help women avoid going down this path. In addition, the analysis showed that women with insufficient levels of vitamin D and estradiol were more likely to have metabolic syndrome than women with sufficient levels. So when you looked at the study more closely, specifically, higher vitamin D was associated with a favorable lipid profile, meaning better cholesterol, better HDL, lower LDL, lower triglycerides, blood pressure was better, and glucose levels were better. Estradiol was negatively associated with cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood pressure. So these results suggest that synergistic role of vitamin D to really help women reduce the risk of developing metabolic syndrome.
Wow. So it's interesting. You've gone through, like you said, the whole life cycle of, when you are pregnant and, the children, and then also when you have PMS and then infertility, and then menopause also to mention. But the interesting thing is, PMS, there's so many individuals that have PMS and we've come to believe that it is a norm. Unfortunately, we've become to believe that it's normal. And then also infertility. There's so many people that are infertile these days. And it's interesting. We're not saying here vitamin D is the cure to all of it, but we're just, like you said, we're just linking a few things of what can assist.
Absolutely. So it's certainly not a miracle supplement that's going to take away all of your problems, but it can be, what I like to say, it's a piece of the puzzle, right? It's a piece of the puzzle. And as you kind of chip away and you fix different deficiencies and improve certain lifestyle factors, then slowly the whole thing comes together and people start to feel better overall.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. And look, the vitamin D has been in the news lately due to, our immune system and the link to immunity and things like that. Are you able to touch a little bit upon that in regards to the link between immunity, women, and vitamin D?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, low levels of vitamin D are associated with an increased risk of respiratory diseases, right, including things like tuberculosis and asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's also been linked to viral and bacterial respiratory infections. It plays a critical role in the immune response by exhibiting both an anti-inflammatory and an immunoregulatory property. And it's very crucial for the activation of the immune system defenses. But this link between immunity and vitamin D, again, isn't something that's unique to women. So I know we're focusing on women, but I have to say that, right? It's important for all sexes and all age groups when it comes to maintaining a strong immune system. And there was another research that I found that I thought was quite interesting that I'd like to share. So it was a randomized controlled trial in Japanese school children, and they were tested whether taking vitamin D daily would prevent the seasonal flu. So the trial followed nearly 340 children for 4 months during the height of the winter flu season. And half of the study participants received pills that contained 1,200 units of vitamin D, and the other half received placebo pills. And the researchers found that type A influenza rates in the vitamin D group were about 40% lower than in the placebo group. And there was no significant difference in the type B influenza rates in that placebo group. So you can see a 40% reduction versus no change at all, right? So those are some pretty significant numbers.
That is an absolutely huge number. 40% is huge. And there's, like you said before, there's so many research out there in regards to this. And I've read this study and I love it. I love how it shows that taking, 1,200 IUs of vitamin D help these individuals. And it's crazy because that's not a large dosage of vitamin D in some instances, well, depending on your levels. So it's absolutely brilliant. It just shows the link between immunity. But now that we know what vitamin D is, now that we know how amazing it is in women's health, how amazing it is for overall health, immunity, and so forth, if someone came to you and wanted to increase their vitamin D levels, what would be some practical tips that you would give these individuals?
So, I really like to keep things simple for people. We've got enough on our plates, right? So I try to keep things simple, and that kind of goes along with vitamin D as well, right? So get outside. Not only will your vitamin D increase, but you'll feel better. Your mental health will be better just from being outdoors. Get outside. Try to go out in the morning because then you'll get the most kind of sun exposure. Obviously be mindful if you are at risk for skin cancer and things, you want to be careful when you're doing that sun exposure. But if possible, make sure you get outside, go for a walk, eat a healthy diet, including the vitamin D rich foods that we talked about, like fatty fish, moderate amounts of fortified dairy. But honestly, just take a vitamin D supplement, right? Take it regularly. Put it in a place where it'll be easy for you to remember, like by your toothbrush or by your coffee pot, somewhere where you will see it and remember to take it. And at the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to, right? Is you probably won't get enough from your food. You probably won't get enough from walking outdoors, if we're going to be honest. So the best thing you can do is just get a supplement and take it regularly.
That's absolutely brilliant. That's such great advice. And like you said earlier, also, like you said, is get tested. Figure out what your levels are.
It'll be, in Ontario, I tell my patients, it'll be the best $40 you spend, right? Like when you consider how much money people spend on supplements and random things that they don't even know if it's going to help them because they haven't done the testing. Vitamin D is so cheap, speaking, right? So get your levels tested and fix that deficiency and then see where you end up.
Yeah. So what would you consider an alarming deficiency and number in regards to vitamin D if they get their test back? I guess depends on the individual and they should talk to their healthcare professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. Here in Canada, the number 75 is kind of the low end. I tend to like people to have like over 100. It also depends on what we're using to measure the units, right? So I'm not sure what they use down in Australia, but you never want to be, whatever the range is in Australia or whatever country people are listening in, you never want to be at the low end of the range. You always want to be kind of mid-range, right? So in Canada, that range is like 75 and up. We aim to be about 100, right? So if I've got patients coming in with vitamin D at 35, 45, 50, I really want to be aggressive in getting their vitamin D levels up there, right? It'll be a different approach than if somebody comes in at like 68 or 70, then I might not feel the need to be quite as aggressive. But the one other thing that I did want to mention before we move on, is the SAD lamp can be very helpful as well. So getting those lamps, especially in the winter, and making sure you have it kind of on your desk for an hour a day while you're working or whatever you're doing, because that can mimic that UVB light in a safe environment. So that's something too that can be really helpful for mood and for improving those vitamin D levels.
Yeah, those lamps have been researched heavily in regards to the circadian rhythm, and they just do absolute wonders. And like you said, also with mood and so forth. So yeah, I think I did an episode on one of those recently. Those lamps are just absolutely brilliant. I love them. To just get that. And like you said, put it in your office, put it when you wake up, when you're making your coffee in the morning, just to get that stuff happening inside of your body to be healthy. And the thing is, like you said, I like to keep things simple, but also savvy and sustainable so you can do it. Using the lamp is being savvy, and sustainable is you just do it every day and it's easy.
Yeah, exactly. And for some people, it's, maybe they're not at the point where they can go for a walk every day. Maybe they, maybe they just need to take the quickest way to to look at this, and that would be simply to take the supplement.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love all those practical tips. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. So to finish off, I ask all my guests, as this is the Natural Health Podcast, what is your best kept health hack, Rahima? What is it? Let's share it.
So, I don't know if I have anything like life-shattering or earth-shattering to share with this one. But, I can share a couple of things that I do that I have found very, very helpful over the years. I always tell patients to drink water, right? Drink lots of water. But I myself was struggling to get my own water in. So one of the things that I started doing is while I'm making my coffee, I drink 2 glasses of water, right? So even before it's made, I've got my 2 glasses of water in, and I like to start the day that way. Some people like to do the lemon water thing, but again, I'm just trying to keep it simple. So I'll just my 2 glasses of water before I have my coffee. And then the other thing that I've started doing in the last little while, and that my son does with me as well, because he was struggling with a bit of anxiety there, is we've started doing like box breathing before every meal. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically, breathing in, counting to 4, holding your breath, counting to 4, breathing out, counting to 4, and holding again, counting for 4. And you can find information on that everywhere. But we found that really helpful to do that kind of before we start to eat, or before we're, if we're rushing to get to the car to get to school, then we'll sit in the car, and before I start driving, I'll say box breathing, and we'll do a cycle of it, just to really get us out of that fight or flight response and to reset our systems so that we're not kind of starting the whole day or whatever we're doing, we're not going into it with that frantic mindset. So those are kind of the 2 things that I found most helpful for me and for my family.
I love that. I love that. Box breathing, go.
Yeah. Takes no time. You got to breathe anyway. May as well do it right.
Yeah. And I mean, if, the army, the military can use it before they go into extreme things, we can do it before we eat or before we get in the car, before we get into traffic.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know that about the army. That's great.
Yeah. They use box breathing a lot. Well, here in Australia they do. I'm not too sure. Around the world, but yeah, they use that's a technique that they're taught before they get into anywhere, which is amazing. But yeah, and then before food, activating your parasympathetic nervous system, vagus nerve, everything. I love that, and I love that your son gets involved. That's absolutely brilliant at a young age, teaching them how to, yes, anxiety is going to be around, but how do we control it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. So look, thank you so much for joining us on the Natural Health Podcast. An absolutely amazing interview on all things of vitamin D and women's health. Before we end, I wanted to know, where can we find you and how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I can be reached at one of the 2 clinics. So it's Dr. Rahima at thesageclinic.com or Dr. Rahima at thetummyclinic.ca. So those would probably be the best 2 emails to reach me at. And I did want to kind of let your listeners know that we are launching something called the Wild Collective. And it is a 10-month program that provides women an in-depth curriculum into their bodies while really providing a safe space for them to gather and support each other. And although I can't provide one-on-one patient support, if you're outside of Ontario, this support group or this curriculum is actually available to anybody from around the world. And if they mention your podcast, they can get $50 off the tuition, which is regularly $599 Canadian.
That is absolutely brilliant. So anyone can access it no matter where they are.
Yeah, anyone. So because it's really just an educational forum, the same regulatory guidelines don't apply. So it's great. We can open it up and really educate women all over the world.
That is brilliant. So what is it going to be focusing on mainly, so we get a bit of a better understanding?
Oh, it's this amazing program that's been launched in Canada nationwide. So our clinic just bought the curriculum this past year and decided to launch the program. And every month focuses on something different in the body. So for instance, the first month is all about your menstrual cycle, right? So really taking a deep dive into understanding your menstrual cycle, how it works, how your menstrual cycle and your in your teens is going to affect how you go through menopause, right? That type of thing. And then there's a month focused on your thyroid, right? What does your thyroid do to support your overall health? How can you support your thyroid? And pretty much every month, there's a month on detoxification, and then there's a month on gastrointestinal health. So every month is focused on one health topic, but it's also the bigger piece of it, or the bigger part of it, is that it brings women together, especially right now, especially with the pandemic, where women are feeling very, very disconnected, right? Very alone, very isolated. So it is all virtual, but it still really helps to bring women together to just chat and support each other.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. And I mean, for that price, the information that you're going to get over 10 months, that's just extraordinary. And learning about your cycle, the thyroid, and so detox and so forth. Absolutely brilliant. And $50 off if you mention Natural Podcast. How blessed are we? Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your time today on the Natural Health Podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Rahima.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us at the Natural Podcast. And remember, the missing link between failure and success is your health.